They took me out of my house and dropped me in a nursing home, then started redecorating the living room like I was already dead. What they didn't know was that I was still alive and far sharper than they ever imagined. My name is Carlos. Subscribe to the channel and stay until the end, because this story doesn't end the way you think. After Sophia passed, the house felt too big. Not because of its size, but because of the echo. The silence that stretched through the mornings, the missing whistle of the kettle, her laughter blending with the radio. It all vanished. It felt cold, even on warm days, and it wasn't the weather. It was the sense that everything was leaving except me. Life turned into a series of motions. A weak cup of coffee, a half-read newspaper, one or two unanswered calls to people who didn't have time anymore. My kids would call sometimes, but it wasn't love. It was a routine check, like making sure some old appliance still worked. "Everything okay, Dad? Eating right?" I'd say yes, and they'd hang up before I could even finish. Then came the kettle. One day I forgot on the stove. Nothing serious, just hissing too long. But that was enough. Enough for them to build a case. The next Sunday they all showed up. Soft voices, hard eyes. Said they were worried. That it was all for my good. "Just for a little while, Dad. A nice place. Doctors, meals, people your age." They didn't ask what I wanted. Didn't let me speak. And suddenly, I was in a car with a suitcase I didn't remember packing. Have you ever felt like you're falling and no one reaches out? That was it. The world kept spinning. Trees outside the window, clear skies, music on the radio. But inside me, something broke. It wasn't a place. It was the gesture, the decision made for me, like I was a burden to be moved. Gently, discreetly, but moved. They looked at me like I'd passed my expiration date. We pulled up to the facility. White facade, trimmed flowers, a cheerful sign at the gate. But it was all a front. The sharp smell of disinfectant. Cold hallways. Generic paintings pretending to be art. Everything screamed, dressed up abandonment. A staff member smiled, asked for my ID, and just like that, I stopped being Mr. Carlos. I became resident number 38. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. The pain was too heavy. It turned into silence. And in that silence, I started thinking, maybe you know the feeling when everything collapses, but something inside you lights up. Sitting there on that narrow bed in that blank, impersonal room, I had a spark. I couldn't leave, but no one said I couldn't act. So I decided to pretend. Pretend I was confused. Pretend I'd accepted it. Pretend I'd given up. They wanted a defeated old man? Fine. I'd give them the performance of a lifetime. But while I played their part, my eyes stayed open. I mapped every inch of that place in my mind. Because if there's one thing I've learned from decades of designing structures, every building, no matter how polished, has cracks. And I was about to find them. That first night, I watched everything. Medicine routines, staff rotations, muffled complaints behind doors. I saw the blank stare of a woman in the common room, and I understood. Here, no one mattered. We weren't people. We were storage. But I noticed something else too, flaws. And where there are flaws, there's opportunity. All I needed was time and quiet. Because if they think I'm finished, they're about to find out who I really am. Every day at the nursing home felt exactly the same. Meds at 7, breakfast at 8, a short walk in the courtyard. Then the TV would blast like anyone was really watching. It was like being stuck in a loop, a carefully repeated cycle of being invisible. But while everyone else surrendered to the routine, I watched. Behind the clean facade, there was disorganization, improvisation, and mismanagement. It wasn't just sadness haunting the place. It was negligence. And where there's negligence, there's room to move. I noticed the meds inventory shrinking without explanation. Meals got cheaper, even though families paid the same. Staff whispered in the hallways. The director showed up once a week, polished suits, arrogant, always rushing. Turns out, the home was just one unit of a small, highly profitable group. And profit clearly mattered more than care. I knew this type of system. Fragile companies dressed up like solid institutions. All it took was pressure in the right spot, and they'd crack. That's when I met Samuel. It started with a casual complaint about the lousy coffee. He was a nurse in his early 30s, a former business student. "Dropped out of my junior year," he said, laughing. but his eyes still had that spark, the kind that sees possibility where others see routine. We started talking in short bursts, testing the waters. Little by little, I saw I could trust him. He had ideas, frustrations, and a hunger for change. Exactly the kind of ally I needed. One night, when everyone was asleep, I opened the false bottom of my suitcase. My old laptop was still there, light, silent, and connected to my investment network. Some might call it reckless to keep it, but I knew I'd need it. They thought they'd unplug me, but I'd only taken a detour. I powered on and waited. In that sterile room, the world opened back up. My account, my passwords, my assets, everything was still mine. They institutionalized me, but they never confiscated my mind. I started slow, mid-risk stocks, small positions, one step at a time. I had to stay under the radar for now. Meanwhile, Samuel and I pitched small improvements to brighten the place. Low-cost ideas with big impact, fresh juice instead of bitter tea, herb plants in a courtyard, reorganizing the library by theme. Tiny changes, the kind a bored old man might suggest. But they started shifting the mood. The directors noticed but didn't care. As long as it cost nothing, they let it be. That's when I realized the size of the opportunity. They didn't take care of what was theirs. But maybe they'd pay attention to what they thought was mine. I started collecting data. Names, numbers, records. Samuel helped with internal files. All of it masked as routine. But the gears were already turning. Some residents began seeking me out. Not for help, just to talk. Stories of abandonment. Children who stopped calling. Grandkids they'd never met. The world saw them as burdens. I saw them as living proof that aging should never mean isolation. At first, I just wanted to survive. But now, I want to transform. I suggested a reading club, and it became something else entirely. A sanctuary, a space for memory, a return of dignity. When I saw their eyes light up at the words in a book, I knew this place could bloom. The building blocks of my next project were right here, in these forgotten lives. Samuel started calling me the master of details. I'd smile and let it slide. But deep down, I was already 10 steps ahead. Every report I read, every meeting I silently observed, confirmed it. This company was a house of cards. And I had already started a blow. They locked me in here. But they forgot one thing. I've always had the keys. On paper, I was just another resident. In reality, I was already acting like an undercover auditor. Every document I collected, every number I cross-checked, revealed more than just poor management. It exposed a rotten system dressed up with flowers at the entrance. I found duplicate invoices, suspicious charges for services that never happened, and worst of all, medications that were bought but never delivered. The money wasn't vanishing. It was slipping into the wrong hands. They probably never imagined an old man with too much time could dig that deep. But they forgot who I was. I didn't become an engineer by luck. I became one through precision. With Samuel's help, I organized everything: spreadsheets, audio files, photos. Undeniable evidence. But it wasn't time to reveal anything. Not yet. I needed something more strategic. That's when the idea came. I'd make an institutional donation, but with conditions. I called the director in for a private chat and spoke in a quiet voice like I was sharing a dying wish. I want to invest in the place where I'll die, but I want to stay involved. He chuckled, pretended to hesitate, and agreed. Thought he was doing a favor for a lonely, wealthy old man. The money was transferred discreetly, and with it came changes small but visible. The front garden was restored. The menu improved. More staff joined the activities team. I was involved in every decision, always under the mask of someone who just wants to help. While they counted the cents for my donation, I was counting the days to my next move. Soon, the residents began to notice. And more than respect, they looked at me with hope. That reading club I started, it became something else entirely. Our meetings turned into safe spaces, places to share, to vent, to remember. People who barely spoke were now reading poetry out loud. Long-forgotten stories came to life again. In those yellowed pages, we remembered who we were and what life had taken without asking. The club became a quiet act of resistance. And that resistance became a movement. It was during one of those meetings that I heard Elsa's story. Left at the hospital after surgery. Never saw her children again. They said I wouldn't remember anyway, she said, with a sad smile that cracked something in me. That night, something reignited. Anger. Not chaotic rage, focused anger. Not just for me. For all of us. I opened my laptop and started writing. A new document. A simple title. The Sophia Foundation. Yes, named after my wife. She always believed that care was a kind of construction too. And right then, I was ready to build something that would outlast everyone who tried to erase me. Samuel was the first to hear about the idea. He got emotional, said he wanted in, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't just some bitter old man chasing revenge. I was a man with a mission. And for the first time, that mission was bigger than the pain. You know that moment when everything clicks? When your past, your grief, and all the injustice line up like an arrow pointing forward. That was it. I didn't want personal justice. I wanted justice for the forgotten. And I knew exactly where to start. The foundation was already set. Now it was time to build the walls. I came in weak, and now they're asking for my approval. They came back. After months of silence, they showed up with practiced smiles and empty gifts. A new scarf, a basket of overpriced cookies, a hug that didn't even last 5 seconds. I could smell their intentions before they said a word. "Dad, we need to talk about the house," my daughter said, using that fake tone of concern. I stayed quiet. She took it as confusion, and I let her. Maybe you've done it too, pretending to be weak just to see someone's true face. It works. They claimed they were struggling, said keeping the house locked up was a waste of money. We could sell it and split the money. You're not going back there anyway, right? I stared into my cup of tea, took my time, didn't answer, changed the subject, asked about the weather, the kids' school. They laughed. "He's getting confused. Poor thing," they whispered in the hallway. But I wasn't confused. I was calculating. The next day, I got an email from a real estate agent. They were already moving forward with the sale. Didn't even ask. They assumed they had power. What they didn't know was the house wasn't mine anymore. At least, not on paper. It belonged to the Sophia Foundation now. Protected, locked down, untouchable. That was the first piece of my quiet revenge falling into place. I remember my hands shaking as I read the finalized document. Not from fear, but from a new kind of grief. That house wasn't just a building. It was home, the place I shared with my wife, where I raised my kids. Now it stood as a symbol of everything they were trying to erase. Turning it into protection was necessary, but it still hurt. Not the sharp sting of betrayal, something deeper, like cutting off a part of yourself to save what's left. That night, I showed Samuel the paperwork. He was stunned. "You really thought of everything." I nodded. But the truth? I didn't think of everything. I was forced to. When life corners you, you learn how to carve new paths, no matter how bloody your feet get. Samuel helped me install hidden cameras in my room. We recorded conversations, captured looks, just in case. And maybe that sounds extreme, but when betrayal comes from the very people you gave life to, you start documenting even the silence. When I looked at my children, I didn't see family anymore. I saw strangers, heirs chasing an inheritance that no longer existed. And something in me shifted. Where I once hesitated, now I don't forgive. The invitation came in a formal envelope, hand-delivered by a nervous staff member. Emergency board meeting. My name was listed alongside doctors, lawyers, and investors. I smiled without saying a word. They were about to learn that the quiet old man, sitting in the garden, was now the company's largest shareholder. And this was only the beginning. That night, I laid my blazer across the bed. Funny how some clothes don't just fit your body. They shift your whole posture. I wasn't just a resident anymore. I was a man returning to the table. The boardroom smelled of expensive coffee and quiet tension. I took my seat slowly, watching their expressions, some polite, some clearly annoyed. The director began with standard formalities, but I gently interrupted. "Before we begin, I have a quick update regarding my financial status." I opened a folder and handed over the holding company's statement. Silence. "I've purchased shares, a considerable amount. I'm here as a partner now." No one said a word. The silence was worse than yelling, thick with disbelief. But once I laid out the numbers, The transfers, the legal approvals, they had no choice but to accept it. Reluctantly, of course. I claimed my seat with the quiet authority of someone taking back what was always his. I didn't ask permission. I just signed the documents. And at the bottom of the meeting minutes, I added my first recommendation. We need to talk about dignity. In the following days, I filed internal proposals, new meal plans, mandatory caregiver training, individual wellness assessments. They might sound small, but to people who feel invisible, small gestures can be revolutionary. And this wasn't just strategy. I knew exactly what it felt like to be treated like a burden. Gradually, the staff's attitude shifted, at first out of obligation, then by influence. The atmosphere began to change. The old man who once sat in silence was now leading. Samuel took on some of the administrative responsibilities, and together we launched a new protocol. We listened to the people who live here. Simple, but no one had ever done it before. A month later, a local news crew showed up, curious about why the place was suddenly getting so much praise online. They found me. I didn't give a speech. I just said, sometimes all it takes is someone willing to see what others choose to ignore. They wrote it down like a quote, but it wasn't. It was just the truth. Other homes started reaching out, asking for partnerships, consultations, transfers. And for the first time in a long while, I saw an elderly man laugh freely while playing dominoes on the porch. No fear, no shame, no weight on his shoulders. That night, I realized I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was shaping something, rebuilding what had been broken from the inside out. Maybe you felt it too. When life hits you so hard, you eventually hit back. But not with anger, with structure, with purpose. They tried to isolate me. So I built a quiet revolution. I spent weeks gathering documents, authorizing transfers, revising every clause. The fund had to be bulletproof, not just legally, but morally. Nothing in my name. Nothing that could be reversed by a careless judge or a greedy child. Every penny, every asset transferred to a project that didn't have a name yet, but already had a soul. And that soul was hers. I started small. The house, my savings, a significant portion of my shares, redirected into the fund. Then I outlined the criteria. Elderly people in vulnerable situations, abandoned, forgotten, or simply left behind by family. Yes, I was thinking about myself, but I was thinking about them too. The man who cried himself to sleep each night. The woman down the hall who couldn't remember her children's names, but still waited for them every afternoon. Their pain was mine, and maybe, together, we could become something greater. The fund's first actions were quiet. Hygiene kits, vision checkups, repairs in the older wings of the building. We installed heaters, bought new wheelchairs. None of it caught the board's attention, exactly as I'd hoped. Because what grows in silence grows stronger. One afternoon, an elderly woman collapsed during lunch. The ambulance took too long. Her insurance wouldn't cover the emergency scan. I picked up my phone, made 3 calls. Within 40 minutes, she was being treated in a private hospital, funded entirely by us. Samuel looked at me, eyes full of tears. She survived. And the next morning, she held my hand and said, "Thank you for reminding me I'm still a person." I cried, later alone, because it wasn't just about her. It was about me too, about everything I'd stopped feeling since being left here, discarded like a broken chair. That one, "thank you," gave me more life than any prescription ever could. And that's when it clicked. This project wasn't just a shield. It was my new heart. The next week, I sat with Samuel in the dining hall. I pulled out a draft, a single sheet of paper. At the top, I'd written Sophia Foundation. He looked confused. "Her name," I said. "She always believed caring for others is what gives life meaning." Now it was giving mine meaning too. I rewrote my will, removed my children. No anger, just justice. I added clauses for continuity, ethical oversight. Samuel would serve as a trustee. Other members? Chosen from the residents themselves. Because if I've learned anything, no one understands abandonment like the ones who've lived it. Sometimes I'd wander through the new wing, noticing little things, the fresh air, the scent of coffee, the sound of laughter in the halls. And I'd think, if I had waited for them to care, none of this would exist. Maybe I wouldn't either. That night, I sat on the old veranda, folder on my lap, her photo tucked inside, and I wrote the final line of my new will. My inheritance now belongs to the ones the world forgot, just like it forgot me. They showed up unannounced, maybe thinking they could catch me off guard like they did last time. But things were different now. I wasn't the man slumped in a chair anymore. I was the head of the new wing, the founder of the foundation, and more than that, I was the old man they'd underestimated for the last time. Samuel buzzed me on the radio. They're at the front desk. I took a breath. Send them up. They walked in with puffed chests, designer suits, and impatient eyes. One of them was holding a copy of the house sale contract. We just need your signature, Dad. I looked at the paper like it didn't even belong in my world. I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch. And when I finally spoke, my voice was calm, like someone who already knew how the story would end. The house isn't mine anymore, and it's not yours either. Confusion flickered across their faces. Then came the frustration, dressed up as concern. They started talking about costs, inheritance, and what was best for everyone. I stood up, walked to the meeting room shelf, and pulled out a black folder with the Sophia Foundation seal. These are the fund's documents, fully registered, irreversible. Then I placed another folder on the table. These are the recordings. They exchanged tense glances. Samuel hit play, and their voices filled the air. He's senile already. Just wait it out. When he dies, I'm gutting the place with my share. He doesn't even know what he owns anymore. Let's just sell it. Their voices. Cold. Calculated. Real. I watched them carefully as panic set in. First, they denied. Then they pleaded. And finally, they threatened. This isn't over, Dad. We're still your family. Family, I echoed, almost under my breath. I walked to the door, opened it, and said, Today, you're on the outside, just like I was for years. Samuel escorted them out. No shouting, no drama, just the same cold detachment they once used on me. The door closed with a quiet click. I returned to my chair, tired but at peace. Because sometimes the greatest justice is never opening that door again. That night, I sat out on the veranda. The sky was clear, and the silence around me felt different. This place, once marked by absence, was now built on presence, on structure, on voice. And though my heart still carried some weight, I knew I'd done what needed to be done. They didn't break me. They woke me up. And that awakening became a revolution. In the community room, an elderly woman brought me a cup of tea. You doing okay, sir? Better than ever, sweetheart. Better than ever. And in that moment, I felt it. The past no longer ruled me. Not the pain, not the blood, only the choice. The choice to stay, even when they tried to throw me away. Now they're the ones left outside, just like I was. For years, becoming president wasn't about ego. It was survival. The institution needed a soul. And, ironically, the discarded one, was the one who brought it back. In those early days, I rewrote the bylaws, got the residents involved in decisions, turned complaints into reports and feedback into action plans. Little by little, the nursing home stopped being just a nursing home. Other branches in the group started watching. Curious, skeptical, but what they saw was impossible to ignore. Family members began showing up again. Volunteers came on their own. The walls gained color. Music returned to the halls. Most importantly, I started to shine again. Growing old was no longer a synonym for being left behind. I was invited to visit the Belmonte unit, one of the worst. I arrived as a guest and left as an advisor. And right then, I made a silent vow. No one would die feeling forgotten. Not on my watch. That became the new empire. Not one made of bricks, but of dignity, of presence, of memory. The changes spread, not just through buildings and policies, but through culture, through the way people looked at each other, through how they listened. New training programs were launched. Partnerships were formed. Then one day, the phone rang. It was the Ministry of Citizenship. They wanted to give me an award. I said no at first. I hadn't done this for medals. But accepting meant giving the foundation visibility, and that could help more people. So I went. On stage, I said only one thing. A country that forgets its elderly is digging its own grave. Applause. Silence. Reflection. After the ceremony came the interviews, magazines, radio, even national TV. I spoke to everyone, but I always returned to the same place. The community room, the laughter in the lunch hall, the domino games, the garden mornings. That was the real prize. Every day, without cameras. Samuel, the nurse who'd become director, handled most of the operations now. And he did it brilliantly. He remembered names, stories, little quirks. Treated every resident like a whole person, not a number. Watching him gave me peace. Because when my time comes, I know it'll all continue. Just the same. Maybe even better. Because this empire wasn't mine. It was ours. I started writing a manifesto about aging with dignity, about intergenerational justice, about the right to exist until the very last breath. Released it online. It went viral. I got messages from grandkids, caregivers, even remorseful children. One wrote, "My grandfather smiled again after hearing your story." That's when I realized just how far this had reached. At the end of the month, another wave of donations arrived from companies, institutions, even former staff members. The fund kept growing. The Sophia Foundation had become a national reference. We'd become the place where the invisible were seen, where the silenced found a voice, where the discarded took the lead. And me? I just watched, grateful. They buried me alive. But they forgot. I was the root. Time didn't stop. Not even for me. My health changed, and that was okay. My days had more pauses now, more tea, more quiet reflection. But they also had laughter, conversations, and regular visits. My independence was honored until the very end. I had my own room with a little balcony overlooking the garden. And every single day, someone would knock gently and ask, "You doing all right in there, Mr. Carlos?" Yes, more than all right. I had prepared myself, like someone tidying their drawers before a long trip. I recorded videos, dozens of them. Some shared advice on management. Others were just stories, light and funny. I talked about loss, about longing, about finding your way back to yourself. I talked about Sophia, and about what truly matters when everything else grows quiet. Maybe one day, someone will watch those videos and feel a little less alone. One of my sons tried to come back. He showed up with teary eyes and a trembling voice, saying he wanted to apologize. I listened, looked him in the eye, and quietly said, "Forgiveness is personal. Justice is collective." That was the end of it. No shouting, no hug. Samuel helped me finalize the foundation's new bylaws. I added a new clause. Elderly people have the right to start over. I told that to an 89-year-old woman once. She grinned and said, "Start over? Honey, I'm just getting started." We laughed. At life, at time, at this beautiful thing called persistence. In my final week, I wrote a letter to Sophia. I poured into it everything the years hadn't let me say. I told her about the foundation, about the elders who now had a home, about Mrs. Estella's grandson finally coming to visit, about the young volunteer who learned to read with us, and the woman who quit her government job to care for the elderly full-time. Sophia would have smiled and said, "I always knew you wouldn't stop here." On the morning I left, I was sleeping with the window open. A soft breeze drifted in uninvited. Birds were singing. I had a photo of Sophia in my hands, and a quiet smile resting on my lips. No pain, no dramatic farewell, just a peaceful rest. The kind that comes to those who truly lived, not merely existed. Who forgave but never forgot. At the funeral, they played one of my videos. I was standing there, cane in hand, saying, "If you've made it this far, it means you've endured. And if you've endured, it means it's still worth going on. Life is calling. Answer it." People cried. People laughed. Even those who had never met me somehow felt like they were part of my story. The next week, they changed the sign out front. It now read, "Sophia Foundation, so no one grows old alone." And just below, in smaller letters, "In memory of Carlos Neves, the man who turned being forgotten into a legacy." There, where there used to be only abandonment, now stood an empire, built with silence, and sorrow, and courage. They call me an old man, so I built an empire with it.